Elizabeth Gray, aged 38, was gazing at the sunset over the Hudson River from her office on the top floor of a skyscraper in Manhattan. Her digital marketing company, Nexus Innovations, had experienced rapid growth in recent years and was listed among the Fortune 500. Elizabeth took a deep breath, feeling a sense of satisfaction after another day's work. However, there was a hint of anxiety in her expression. She was 7 months pregnant with twins, and balancing work and home life had become increasingly difficult. "Elizabeth, the materials for tomorrow's meeting are ready," her secretary, Jessica, called out. "Thank you, Jessica. I'll check them first thing tomorrow morning," Elizabeth replied with a smile. Upon leaving the office and arriving at her upscale apartment, Elizabeth saw her husband James, 40, deeply engrossed in a phone conversation. He was a well-known investment banker, and their marriage was the envy of many. "Ah, Elizabeth, welcome home." James ended the call and approached his wife with a slightly flustered demeanor. "How was your day?" Elizabeth felt something off in her husband's attitude, but chose not to probe deeply. As usual, "I secured a contract with a new client." "That's wonderful," James said, but his eyes seemed preoccupied with something else. That night, after finishing a business call, Elizabeth heard voices from the study as she walked down the hallway. It was James and his mother, Caroline. "Yes, we need to sort it out by Jennifer's birthday." Caroline's voice was audible. "I understand, Mom, but I'm not sure how to bring it up with Elizabeth," James responded. Elizabeth paused and listened intently, her heart beginning to race. There's no choice for her. One of the twins must be given to Jennifer. She has a right to have a child. Caroline's voice was cold. Elizabeth's mind went blank. She held her breath and listened more closely to the conversation. "But Mom, it's illegal and unethical," James weakly objected. "It's the only way for your sister to be happy." "It's for the family, James." Elizabeth felt her legs wobble. Her mind raced through the events of her life like a whirlwind. The day of her wedding, Caroline's cold gaze, Jennifer's snide remarks, and the sudden change in their behavior after she announced her pregnancy. Everything connected. She quietly returned to her room and sat on the bed. Her hands trembled and cold sweat ran down her back. Elizabeth placed her hands on her stomach and spoke to her unborn twins. "It's going to be all right. Mommy will protect you." That night, Elizabeth couldn't sleep at all. She spent the entire night thinking about what she should do next. The next morning, Elizabeth woke up earlier than usual and acted cautiously. She left the house before James woke up and headed to the office. Upon arriving at the office, Elizabeth immediately took action. First, she contacted a trustworthy lawyer. "Sarah, it's an emergency. Can we meet right now?" An hour later, Elizabeth was confessing everything in Sarah's office. "Elizabeth, this is serious. We need to act immediately," Sarah said with a grave expression. "I understand. But what should I do?" Elizabeth's voice trembled. "First, we need to gather evidence. Then, ensure your and the baby's safety. We should also start preparing for a divorce lawsuit." Elizabeth nodded. She could feel her life was about to change drastically. From that day, Elizabeth began to lead a double life. On the surface, she acted as if nothing was wrong, while secretly preparing to escape. Every day, she slowly moved out necessary items, opened a new bank account, and searched for a safe residence, all for the sake of protecting her unborn children. And she waited for the day James would leave on a business trip. Elizabeth was reminiscing about her wedding day with James 10 years ago. The luxurious ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, hundreds of guests, and Caroline's icy gaze. "Oh, Elizabeth." "Where did you buy that dress?" Caroline had asked sarcastically. "It's Vera Wang," Elizabeth replied proudly. "Well, it's adequate," Caroline snorted dismissively. Since that day, the relationship between Elizabeth and Caroline had been frosty. Jennifer, Elizabeth's sister-in-law, followed Caroline's lead and continued to treat Elizabeth coldly. Elizabeth immersed herself in her career to escape this situation and eventually founded Nexus Innovations, achieving great success. However, everything changed when her pregnancy was revealed. "Well, Elizabeth, twins, isn't that wonderful?" Caroline suddenly became friendly. "I'll plan the baby shower," Jennifer offered excitedly. Elizabeth couldn't hide her confusion, but she accepted their offers, thinking it might be a chance for reconciliation. Now, everything was clear. Their change in behavior was a scheme to take one of the twins. Elizabeth remembered when she met James. It was 6 years ago, when she was still working at a small advertising agency. One day, during a presentation for a major bank's advertising campaign, she met James, who attended as the bank's representative. During the presentation, Elizabeth confidently explained her ideas. James seemed captivated by her passion and creativity. After the presentation, James approached her. "Excellent presentation, Ms. Gray." "Thank you," Elizabeth smiled. That was the beginning of their relationship. James frequently invited Elizabeth out for meals, and they quickly grew close. Elizabeth was drawn to James's kindness and intelligence. He supported her career and seemed to understand her dreams, or at least she thought so. When she decided to marry him, Elizabeth was filled with happiness. However, on the day she first met James's family, she couldn't shake a feeling of unease. "It's okay. They'll like you," James tried to reassure her. But the reality was harsh. Caroline and Jennifer had no intention of accepting her from the start. "James, are you sure about her?" Caroline whispered to her son, loud enough for Elizabeth to hear. "Mom, Elizabeth is a wonderful person," James responded, but his voice lacked conviction. Since then, family gatherings have always been filled with stress. Elizabeth tried desperately to be accepted, but the barriers erected by Caroline and Jennifer were thick. James found himself caught in the middle and gradually began to distance himself from Elizabeth. Elizabeth threw herself into her career as a way to escape this situation and made Nexus Innovations a huge success. However, her success did not solve her domestic problems. It only fueled Caroline and Jennifer's jealousy. "That woman is getting too cocky," Jennifer sneered. "James, she's using your position," Caroline incited her son. Elizabeth felt the man she thought she loved gradually drifting away from her. Now, everything was clear. Her life, her love, and even her unborn children were in danger. Elizabeth resolved never to let anyone control her life again. Above all, she was determined to protect her unborn children. She stood up quietly and looked out the window. The Manhattan nightscape spread out before her. In this city she had built everything, and now she was ready to leave it all behind. Elizabeth took a deep breath. The next day, a new life would begin. Shaking with emotion, Elizabeth carefully plotted her course of action. She contacted Sarah, a longtime friend and lawyer. "Sarah, it's an emergency. Can we meet first thing tomorrow morning?" Elizabeth's voice trembled over the phone. The next morning, Elizabeth revealed everything to Sarah in her office. "Elizabeth, this is serious. We need to act now," Sarah said with a grave expression. The two devised a meticulous plan. Elizabeth began to discreetly remove important company documents and personal belongings from her office. "But what about the company?" Sarah asked. Elizabeth took a deep breath. "I'll temporarily leave it in the hands of Mark, the vice president. He can handle it." A few days later, seizing the opportunity while James was on a business trip, Elizabeth made her move. "Lisa, I need to take a few days off for an urgent matter. Please cancel all my appointments," she instructed her secretary over the phone. Elizabeth picked up the suitcase she had prepared and left her apartment. She headed to a safe location arranged by Sarah. In the taxi, Elizabeth reflected on her decision. Running away and leaving everything behind was a choice she had never imagined making. However, she was convinced that it was the only way to ensure the safety of her children. Upon arriving at the safe location, Elizabeth took a deep breath. The small apartment was nothing compared to the luxurious apartment she was accustomed to, but it offered her freedom. That night, James called multiple times. "Elizabeth, where are you?" "I'm worried about you," his voice left on the voicemail. Elizabeth did not respond. Her priority was the safety of herself and her unborn children. A few days later, Elizabeth met with Sarah again. "Everything is ready," Sarah said. "All the divorce papers are prepared." Elizabeth nodded. "Thank you, Sarah. I don't know what I would have done without you." "It's okay, Elizabeth. You are a strong woman. You will get through this." That afternoon, Elizabeth went to the hospital for a routine checkup. "Ms. Gray, the twins are doing well," the doctor informed her with a smile. "You'll be giving birth soon." Elizabeth's face showed relief, but at the same time, she felt anxious about the life that lay ahead. When Elizabeth left the hospital, she unexpectedly encountered someone familiar, her father-in-law, Robert. "Elizabeth." Robert approached her, looking surprised. Elizabeth tensed up, but there was no hostility in Robert's eyes, only sadness. "I know." "About Caroline and Jennifer's plan," Robert said in a low voice. Elizabeth gasped. "I couldn't stop them." "I'm sorry," Robert continued, "but I think your decision is the right one." Elizabeth was lost for words. Robert took her hand. "You're in a safe place, aren't you? Stay there. I won't tell anyone." Elizabeth nodded, holding back tears. "Thank you." "Father-in-law." Robert smiled kindly. "Be happy, Elizabeth, and take good care of my grandchildren." They parted ways, and Elizabeth quickly left. A flicker of hope lit up in her heart. That night, Elizabeth wrote a long letter. It was a farewell letter to James. "Dear James, I must inform you that our marriage has come to an end. I have learned about the plan you, your mother, and your sister had to take our children. I cannot believe you would try to steal our children. I am starting a new life with our children, and you will not see them. Legal proceedings will be conducted through my lawyer. Goodbye, James. I hope someday you understand the true meaning of family. Elizabeth." After posting the letter, Elizabeth took a deep breath. With that, her ties to her old life were finally severed. A new chapter was beginning. Elizabeth placed her hands on her stomach, speaking to her unborn children. "It's going to be all right. Mommy will definitely make you both happy." 1 week after Elizabeth's sudden disappearance, the first hearing regarding her divorce and custody took place at the New York Family Court. Upon entering the courtroom, Elizabeth saw James and his family. Caroline's eyes were filled with hatred. "I will never allow your plan to succeed," Elizabeth declared firmly. James stood up, his face pale. "Elizabeth, let's talk. I will explain everything." However, Elizabeth shook her head. "It's too late, James." The judge banged the gavel, and the hearing began. Sarah, acting as Elizabeth's attorney, engaged in a fierce legal battle with James's lawyer. "Our client has evidence of a plan to transfer one of the twins, who are still in the womb, to another person," Sarah asserted strongly. James's lawyer desperately countered, "There is no such plan. This is all a misunderstanding." However, when Elizabeth's recorded conversation was presented as evidence, the courtroom erupted into chaos. Suddenly, Jennifer stood up and shouted, "I have a right to have children. Elizabeth, you only think about your own happiness." The judge sternly admonished Jennifer, "Any further disruption will be considered contempt of court." The hearing lasted several hours. Ultimately, the judge made a provisional ruling. At this point, the safety of the unborn twins is the priority. "I grant temporary sole custody to Mrs. Elizabeth Gray. Mr. James Gray and his family are prohibited from contacting Mrs. Elizabeth Gray without court permission." Elizabeth's face showed relief. Although this was just the beginning of a long legal battle, her immediate safety was assured. As she left the courtroom, Elizabeth and James made eye contact. Regret was evident in his eyes, but Elizabeth did not look back. That night, Elizabeth was in her hotel room, reflecting on the long day when she suddenly heard a knock at the door. Cautiously opening it, she found Robert standing there. "Elizabeth, I need to talk," Robert said quietly. Elizabeth hesitated, but then invited Robert into her room. "I couldn't stop Caroline and Jennifer's actions, and I failed to persuade James." "I am truly sorry," Robert apologized. Elizabeth silently listened to his words. "However, your decision was the right one," Robert continued. "I want to offer all the support I can." Elizabeth, with tears in her eyes, hugged Robert. "Thank you." Father-in-law. The trial continued for several weeks. Elizabeth and Sarah desperately fought against the attacks from James's side. Eventually, the court granted Elizabeth full custody. Furthermore, a restraining order was issued against James and his family. The moment the judgment was pronounced, Elizabeth let out a deep sigh of relief. The long battle had finally ended. As she left the courtroom, Elizabeth looked back at James. He sat there, devastated. For a moment, Elizabeth felt a pang of sympathy, but it quickly faded. Now, it was time for a new life. Time to build a happy future with her children. 2 months later, Elizabeth safely delivered twins, a boy and a girl, at a hospital in Boston. She named her son Michael and her daughter Sophia. Holding Michael and Sophia in the hospital room, Elizabeth cried tears of joy, relief, and new resolve. "I will protect you both, no matter what," she vowed to the twins. After being discharged, Elizabeth spoke with her lawyer Sarah over the phone. "The final judgment is in, Elizabeth. It's a complete victory for you. You have been granted full custody." Elizabeth took a deep breath. "Thank you, Sarah. I truly appreciate everything." Subsequently, Elizabeth began her new life. She opened a new office in Boston and expanded Nexus innovations throughout the East Coast. Balancing parenting and work was never easy. However, Elizabeth overcame the challenges with her inherent strength and determination. Michael and Sophia grew up healthy, maturing day by day. Every time Elizabeth saw her children's smiles, she felt reassured that her decisions were right. One day, while walking with the twins in the park, Elizabeth unexpectedly encountered her father-in-law, Robert. "Elizabeth." Robert called out, looking surprised. Elizabeth tensed up, but there was no hostility in Robert's expression. I want to apologize," Robert stammered. "I couldn't stop Caroline and Jennifer's actions, and I failed to persuade James. I am truly sorry." Elizabeth hesitated for a moment but eventually nodded slowly. "Thank you, Robert. I'm glad to hear your words." "May I see my grandchildren?" Robert asked hopefully. Elizabeth thought deeply. The wounds of the past were not easily healed. However, she felt that for her children's sake, she should not completely close off the possibility of building new relationships. "Please give me some time. It's still too early, but someday. Surely." Robert nodded in understanding. Holding the twins, Elizabeth looked to the future. She had overcome difficulties and carved out a new life on her own. And now she had precious lives to protect. What the future held was uncertain. However, Elizabeth was confident. Together with her beloved children, she was sure they could build a happy future. Elizabeth reaffirmed her vow. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she would protect and continue to love her children. That was her chosen path and her happy life. On Michael and Sophia's 10th birthday, Elizabeth received a special letter. It was from James. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope, and inside was a lengthy letter. "Dear Elizabeth, 10 years have passed, and I finally found the courage to write to you. First, I must deeply apologize. I still regret my weakness and foolishness at that time. I succumbed to the pressure from my mother and Jennifer and made the choice to lose the person I loved most and our children. That was the biggest mistake of my life. Over the past decade, I've deeply reflected on my actions and have been receiving counseling. I've also come to understand the true meaning of family. I have been watching Michael and Sophia grow from afar. Knowing that they are happy and healthy brings me immense relief, and I understand that it is all thanks to your strength and love. I am well aware that I have no right to be involved with the children. However, if possible, I would someday like to meet them. Even if I can't be involved as a father, I hope to at least touch a part of their lives. Of course, this considers your and the children's wishes first. If you say it's not possible, I will accept that. Elizabeth, I have the utmost respect for your courage and strength, and I am grateful for how wonderfully you have raised our children. Lastly, I apologize once again from the bottom of my heart, and I truly wish you and the children happiness. From James." After reading the letter, Elizabeth exhaled deeply. A whirlwind of emotions swirled inside her: anger, sadness, and a trace of sympathy. She stood by the window, watching Michael and Sophia play in the garden. The twins were running around energetically, and their laughter reached her in the room. Elizabeth smiled. For the past 10 years, she had devoted everything to raising her children, and her efforts had borne fruit. Michael and Sophia had grown into wise, compassionate children. She looked at the letter again. James's words seemed sincere. However, the wounds of the past were not so easily healed. Elizabeth decided. She could not immediately welcome James back into her children's lives. However, she would not completely close off the possibility. She sat at her desk and began writing a response letter. "Dear James, I received your letter and, honestly, it left me with mixed feelings. The past cannot be changed, and its impact still lingers in our lives. However, I have chosen to look forward and live for Michael and Sophia's sake. The children are growing up healthy and happy. They do not yet know about you, but the day will come when I will share the truth with them. When that time arrives, I will respect their feelings. At the moment, I am not considering direct visits. However, if the children grow older and decide for themselves that they want to meet you, I will not stand in their way. Until then, I can commit to sending you an annual update about the children, including photos. I cannot promise more than this at this time. Sincerely, Elizabeth. She placed the letter in an envelope, wrote the address, and before taking it to the post office, she looked out at the garden once more. Michael and Sophia were happily collaborating on something in the sandbox, chatting and laughing as they worked together. Elizabeth felt a warmth in her chest. Her life had taken an unexpected direction, but she had no regrets. She called out to the children, Michael, Sophia. "It's snack time." The twins ran into the house with glee. Elizabeth hugged them and kissed their foreheads. "Mom, we love you," they both exclaimed in unison. Elizabeth smiled. "I love you too." She set the letter aside. She would take it to the post office the next day. For now, she was going to enjoy the time with her precious ones. That was Elizabeth's new life. 10 years ago, she made a tough decision and stepped into the unknown. Now, she has treasures beyond measure. Elizabeth reaffirmed her vow. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she would protect and continue to love her children. That was her chosen path and her happy life.